Hey everyone, welcome back to Handing the Shame Back, my channel dedicated to adult survivors of child sexual abuse here in New Zealand and out across the world. As with all shows, if you feel triggered at all, please stop watching, go to the show notes below where you'll be guided to some help and support. So it's my absolute pleasure tonight to introduce to you Perry Power. Now, Perry Power comes to us from the UK, and there's several things I can tell you about Perry, because 3 is not enough, just saying, audience, so just hear me out here. So he's a writer, he does some speaking, he's a coach, he's also a campaigner and activist for intra familial child sexual abuse. Did I get that right, Perry?
You did.
And he also runs not one, because one's not enough. Come on, team, keep up. Not one, but 2 charitable trusts, organisations over in the UK. So I'm tired thinking about it all. Hello to you, Perry.
Hi, Gloria. It's funny when you asked for 3 things. I was like, damn. I remember a time where I couldn't even give you one thing. And I think there's an element of that we talk about this a lot with victims and survivors and warriors. I also call it that it is a common thing for those who've been through abuse and been through trauma to not see themselves as accomplishments, to not see the things that they've done also as wins. And it's a beautiful shift that I've seen, that I've made over the years, for sure.
That's fantastic. And I guess actually, now that you're talking like that, what would be useful for our audience is, and please, audience, feel free to comment and share and ask any questions you need to. What would be really useful, Perry, is to understand, obviously you're a survivor, where you come from, kind of what your story is, and then we can take it from there.
Sure thing. So I was ultimately, from a young age, raised by my dad. My mother left when I was 4. So it's just me and my dad. Then my stepmom came into the picture a couple of years later. She moved in. She became my mum. I saw my actual mum like once or twice a year. Now I have a great relationship with her. I talk to her all the time, which is fantastic. So I'm fortunate enough to have 2 mums. And I was the best man at my dad and stepmom's wedding. And I was like 9 years old, I think it was, which is amazing. I still don't know a 9-year-old is the best man at a wedding. And those were great times. Then I will lead you to the event where it stopped, and then I will backtrack. Sure. So when I was 11 and a half, roughly, years old, I was at my nan's house. So my nan being my dad's mum. Okay, so you have my nan, you have my step granddad, which is her husband, not blood. And he's an Irish man from Cork in Ireland. Now, I used to go around there quite frequently, usually with family members, with my dad, usually, or my cousin, she acted like my sister growing up. My cousin and my auntie's kind of like my third mum. So I go around there a lot. Now, there was this occasion where we have me, my step granddad, and my stepmom in the living room. And how, if the listeners and the watchers can sort of picture this, if you've got a living room, you've got a sofa up against the window, coffee table in front of it, and a sofa on the opposite side facing that sofa. So if you're sitting down, and somebody's sitting on the other sofa, you're going to be sitting towards each other, right? Now, if you sort of turn your head to like the left or to the opposite side, you've got a TV on one side of the room, right? So you can be sitting on the sofa and you can be watching TV. Now, the reason why I picture that is for a reason. So I'm now sitting on my step granddad's lap watching TV, right? I used to do that as a kid, sit on his lap watching TV. My stepmom is sitting opposite us watching TV too. Now, out of the corner of her eye, she sees my step granddad's. Now, he used to smoke roll-up cigarettes, and he had his arm over the arm of the sofa, and a cigarette drops out of his hand, falls onto the carpet. She sort of looks and looks back, carries on watching TV. Moments go by, she's figuring out why on earth is he not picking up a cigarette, because now it's burning a hole in the carpet. So she sort of looks at the cigarette and is thinking that, and then she looks up and she sees underneath a blanket, his hand was down my pants, playing with me, right, whilst watching TV. And then she sort of like, she just froze and she stood up, left the living room, went into the kitchen and called me as if to ask me something, you know. I go into the kitchen. She doesn't bring it up. She takes me home. She tells my dad. Now, my dad's reaction was anger, right? But towards me, he wanted to shout at me. My stepmom stopped him. Why on earth are you shouting at him? You know, this was him, as in his step granddad. So he comes and questions me about what happened. And I remember it's a very, very, very vague memory. But I do remember sort of feeling like, why on earth is my dad getting pissed right now? What's his problem, right? Yeah. And he was questioning me about what happened, and I was like, "But yeah, that's what you done. What's wrong with that?" type of thing, right? Because at the time, my step granddad was just giving me a love that no other family member was giving me. Now that made my step granddad very special to me. He was awesome. He was my hero, right? It was a special time when he used to go around there. And because don't forget as well that these organs, a man, penis, woman, vagina, right? They are sexual organs. And I've talked to many survivors about this, where they used to feel guilt later on in life because there was elements of it that they enjoyed, even though they didn't ask for it, right? Because that's just how it is. So as a boy, there was elements of me enjoying it. And I had no idea what any of that was. I didn't know what sex was. I didn't know what sexual abuse was. No idea. And why should I at that age? Right? That's years of innocence. Yes. Right. Yeah. And so my dad questions me, and he then basically says to me, right, you're not going around there anymore, and don't tell anybody about this. Don't go to school, tell your friends. Don't go and tell your mum. Keep this here at home. I'm thinking, okay, ridiculous. Now, so years go on. A couple of years, I think it might have been a year or two later, I was at school. Now, I don't remember doing this at all. I was in English class, and a teacher, it must have been a substitute teacher, she asked us to write a short story for English class and then hand it in at the end. I supposedly wrote a story, handed it in, but that story was about a kid being abused by his step granddad. Don't remember writing it.
Wow.
Now the teachers called up social services, called up my parents, questioned my parents. That makes my dad furious because he tells me to keep it a secret. Now I've gone to school and told everybody got social services involved. And then that was then caused me to be partnered up with a school counselor that I saw to begin with once a week. Then it was every second week. Then it was once a month for a couple of years at school. Now, I only remember 1 or 2 sessions. I don't remember any of them, right? So now to speed the story up a little bit, I then leave school and then go to college. As I go to college, I'm this boy who is still a virgin because he's very shy around girls. He's not that, people know him, this version of Perry, but he's not the popular kid. But Perry wanted to be the popular kid. Okay. And then from college, he then changes to a new college, to a new location. And that was his opportunity to, the actor in him, to be Perry Power 2.0. And this version of Perry, he was a player. So when he goes to this new college and people are interacting with him, he's amazing. He slept with loads of girls. He's very popular, doesn't care about what he doesn't need to care about. And he started to wear these masks. It started to be this identity. And he faked it until he made it. And then a couple of years later, it all came crashing down. In 2017, my dad, paramedics get called to my family home. Because essentially now, if we change the story into my dad, the focus here, my dad was an amazing man, absolutely amazing. Londoner, amazing man. But he was a man's man. He was a very typical man's man. Okay. Now, he then turned to alcohol and he became an alcoholic roughly, to be honest, for many, many years. But very evident 2014 roughly became, that's when I noticed it, because he used to ask me to fill up the vodka bottles with water, put it back in the cupboard so my stepmom wouldn't notice, right? And I would do that. So that his sort of alcoholism then led to high blood pressure tablets, then led to diabetes in January 2017. Then June 1st, 2017, he has a pain in his stomach, shortness of breath. Paramedics come around. They say, we need to take you down to the hospital because we need to even out your blood levels. So they put him in the back of the ambulance van, and my dad doesn't make it to the hospital. He had a heart attack in the back of the van, and he flatlined relatively instantly, which is what the paramedics said to us. And that was obviously, as you can imagine, a horrible time. But what happened was, within like 6 months after his passing, I then entered the stage of reflecting, self-reflecting. And at that time, I didn't know why the universe was speaking through me. This is the only thing I can put it down to, as to why I needed to speak out about my abuse. I had no idea why, but at that time, I didn't know why. Why was that, right? Because I was saying this about myself, that I need to speak out. Then the other thing was, I was questioning why my dad was an alcoholic, essentially, right? A couple of weeks before his passing, I messaged him because he came around my house drunk, said that he's just had an argument with my stepmom, and then drove home. He used to drink, drive all the time, right? And I texted him saying, why are you drinking so much, Dad? And I always remember this exact words. Why are you drinking so much, Dad? Question mark. He replies back, to fight away the demons. And that was, I remember reading that, and I was like, and I said to my stepmom after his passing about that's what he said. And my stepmom was like, what demons is he talking about? Right. And obviously, when somebody's in silence, if we're none the wiser, we don't have the awareness yet of the stages of those people living in silence and the pain that they're living with. Right. And the signs of that, somebody who lacks that awareness would just be like, what demons is he talking about? He's got nothing wrong with him. He's got a roof over his head. Right. What's his problem? But so I asked that, thinking about it. Then I broke my silence initially to my girlfriend, my now ex-girlfriend, but at the time my girlfriend. And she, luckily, I say luckily, I didn't break my silence. I remember when I was thinking about it, that she might leave me, right? Because she started dating somebody who was Jack the Lad, a player, but I wasn't. It was a lie. And I told her this, right? So I told her that it was a lie, who she started dating is a lie. Then I told her about the abuse. She welcomed me with open arms, luckily. 2-3 months later, I was at a business mastermind conference to about 6 or 7 other entrepreneurs. I then spoke again. It just came out of me, spoke again. Now driving home, now this is where we edging towards the end of the story now. And then driving home from the mastermind, I was like, right, I need to share my story again. Because when we're surrounded by people who are growth minded, right, they expand our bubble, right? They expand our comfort zone. Now, when I'm driving home, I'm like, I'll share my story again when I get home. But then the voice in my head is like, Perry, no, you won't, because your comfort zone, that bubble would have shrunk, and you would have sold yourself a story and talked yourself out of it. So I pull over and I share my story again on video, and I put it on Facebook. That went viral. And then from there, I go around to my aunt. Well, I go home, visit my stepmom. And she says to me, she goes, we didn't know that the abuse went on for 1.5 years. Right. And I was like, what do you mean? She goes, well, when I caught it happening, I was led to believe that that was the only time it happened. And I was like, no, that was the last time it happened. But it was going on for over 1 year before that. Right. That was a constant thing. Me sitting on his lap, I knew what was going to come. his hand would slide down my pants, right? And that was just one of the things that he would do. I won't go into all of them, but that was just one of the things that he would do. And she was like gobsmacked. I then go around to my auntie's house to visit her in London. And then I'm sitting there with my auntie, with my cousin, Kelly. And then my auntie's like, you know, you weren't the only one who was abused. And I said, I know, me and Kelly. Now, I've known this much, right? My cousin Kelly is 6 or 7 years older than me. She's always told me about the abuse that she went through with our step granddad. It was just me and her that went through it. So she was like, it wasn't just you. I said, yeah, it was me and Kelly. She goes, it wasn't just you two. I said, who else? She goes, me. So that's me. That's my cousin. That's my auntie. She goes, and then your dad.
Yeah.
And then I sat back in that sofa and I was like, whoa, okay, now the dots connect. Now it makes sense why my dad told me to keep it a secret, because he was living in silence. Now it makes sense why my dad was an alcoholic. It was a coping mechanism for him living in silence. What were demons? Now we know what they are. My dad lived and died in silence, right? Now that there triggered my movement, triggered my message. My book, Breaking the Silence, is all about breaking the silence, break that generational cycle of abuse, right? But my work specifically, if you look online, what's the statistics of children that go through sexual abuse? 1 in 20. What's the statistics of those abused by a family member, intrafamilial abuse? We don't know. We don't know the statistics, right? Because it hasn't been done yet. Because that is a section, right, of sexual abuse, right? But that specific section, there is the most taboo, because nobody wants to come out and says that they were raped by their dad. Nobody wants to come out and says that their brother had sex with them for 6 years growing up, right? Nobody wants to talk about that. But it's that silence that perpetuates the generational cycle of abuse. And that is something that I'm doing throughout all of my work to help break that stigma and bring out these real statistics so people can actually know that parents are abusing their kids, right? Uncles are abusing their nephews and nieces, right? Obviously not all families, but it goes on a lot more than you can ever imagine. And that is what I'm trying to achieve in my work.
And that's fantastic. But I'm just going to come back at you with a statistic here. The police in New Zealand tell me they have one report that suggests it's up to 1 in 3 adults in our country have experienced some form of child sexual abuse. So I don't know where 1 in 20 comes from, but there's a lot of adults out there, Perry. And that also, because of the shame and the silence around it, these numbers are probably underreported as well.
Of course.
It's huge. And, isn't that interesting? Your dad, right from a very young age, just wanted you to shut up.
Yeah.
Because it was obviously so big for him. But wow, how powerful for you.
Yeah, I mean, he's living in silence, and then he's going to have the guilt that he put his son in the environment of the abuser, right? So we need to acknowledge that part, that he's going to be living with a lot of guilt. And I had to go through my own stages of forgiveness, right? So I talk a lot about healing, and for me, the key for my healing, and the thing that I talk about a lot, well, overall, I say about how, like Tony Robbins says, change your story, change your life. And whilst that definitely has a place, for me, is own your story, own your life, right? A lot of victims, a lot of survivors, they try to run away from the truth, right? Instead of owning the story that they've lived in order to own their life. And a big part of that, definitely for me and for a lot of people in my audience, is forgiveness. I went through forgiving my dad, went through forgiving me, and then forgave myself for not speaking out about the abuse and for partly enjoying it, I guess. And then I forgave my step granddad. Now, for those listening, forgiveness has nothing to do with the abuser. You don't forgive them to let them off the hook. You're completely forgiving them for yourself. It's all about you. It's nothing to do with them. We don't care, right? It's about yourself. Yeah. And me forgiving him, what that allowed me to do was lead with curiosity. So leading with curiosity, I was like, how can I find forgiveness? Well, for me personally, is awareness. Now, not everybody's going to be fortunate enough to find out the story of the abuser, right? And if that is the case, then you would have to put to bed the fact that you won't know. You can maybe assume that they went through their own traumas, okay? And then allow that to be the facts that you're living with. But for me, leading with curiosity led to me, cutting the story short, finding out that he abused all of his kids. So I'm now close with 2 of his daughters, right? If I hadn't had forgiveness and he was a vile human being and I hated him, I'd also hate his family because they're all connected. Whereas in fact, they're all victims too.
Yeah.
Right? Because he abused them. I found out that, have you seen the film Spotlight?
Yes, one of my favorites.
Yes, fantastic film. So
Step.
at the end of that movie, before the credits, they list all the places around the world, right? Now, one of them is Cork in Ireland.
Yes.
Now, as I investigated further, my step granddad and his brother were sent to a industrial school which was run by brothers, Catholic priests, and my step granddad, his brother, and a lot of the kids there were continuously raped, beaten, because sexual abuse was their form of punishment and it was their form of love. So my step granddad grew up in that environment, which is one of the documentations of Spotlight, right?
Yep.
When they uncovered it. So he grew up in that environment, didn't heal his wounds, and later in life continued that cycle of abuse. And that's why it's all a part of my message. And what Spotlight done with uncovering the chain of abuse and cover-ups and put that into a study and released it, which is people, should be looking into if they've watched the film, is actually look into the paperwork behind it and the discoveries and the searchings and findings. That is exactly what I want to do around intrafamilial abuse, right? And blow the lid off it in the same way, which is why I'm working on my feature movie. So we've got a production company out in LA that's working on a movie that is going to basically do what Spotlight done as a drama feature film, but do it for intrafamilial abuse.
Fantastic. And look, there's just so many people across the world that would be able to relate and connect to exactly what you're saying. The beautiful part of your story, Perry, and I'm sure there's many beautiful parts, but the beautiful part that touches me, 2 things. One is that your dad he broke the cycle, actually. He broke the cycle because he never went on to abuse. And you've actually not just broken the cycle, but you've carried it further by turning that dark into light and holding up for other survivors. So, wow, thank you on behalf of all survivors, because it takes a lot of courage to speak out, and especially within a family where the silence is the most important thing at all costs. And we know that what that does for our survivors out there watching and listening, they'll be able to relate, is that where there's silence, it ensures that the shame keeps going on. And as you indicated, you reinvented yourself, became Perry Mark II. But the point is, there was nothing wrong with Perry Mark I. It was just the silence had to keep you quiet and hidden.
Yeah, it is the silence that there was a quote by Gabor Mate who said he said that the events that we go through isn't a trauma, it's a silence that it lives in that creates that trauma.
Yep.
And it's very true. That's what leads to the coping mechanisms, that's what leads to the hurt, is what leads to the pain, and it's what led to my dad living and dying in silence.
Yeah, and just so sad. And I bet there's a part of you that knows he's with you and he's helping with the work you're doing. He's with you, supporting you.
Well, yeah, so my new organization that I launched on the 1st of June, just gone, that's called the Andy Project. Now, the Andy Project Andy being my dad's name.
Oh.
The Andy Project is specifically for male survivors of specifically intrafamilial child sexual abuse, and it's to help them break their silence and give them the support system that they need to heal and move forward in life. And that, if you go on to it's theandyprojects.org.uk, if you go onto that website, you'll see that that a lot of charities are set up in like a corporate fashion, right? It's like a separate entity, right? And that's fantastic. But I do know firsthand, for some people, it does create disconnection, right? The reason why, when I broke my silence, I have so many people reach out to me. Had another one yesterday with just these crazy stories. But the reason why they reach out to me and share their story within the first message, not hello, Perry, hey, Perry, boom, here's my story, right? Because I am the brother that they wish that they had,
Yeah.
right? And that's what I say a lot. I'm the brother that they wish they had, that they can talk to. And it's because it's the face, right? So I wanted to inject that same thing into the Andy Project. You go on there, it's my face. Andy, for short, is what the charity's called, right? Andy, it's a man's name. So it's like, it's easier to open up and connect with it. Like my one of my best friends said to me, he goes, the other week he was feeling very depressed, and he wanted to call, I can't remember, it was a helpline. I can't remember what he said it was, but he wanted to call a helpline, and he goes, and he didn't, because he didn't want to call 112568, right? Blah 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 helpline, because he's like, what I wanted to do was just talk to a friend, is what he said, right? He goes, if, for example, the Andy Project equivalent for him, right, was there, he would have called them because he was calling Andy. Yeah. And I thought that was a very interesting thing, because I think that speaks to a lot of men living in silence, that a lot of shame comes around it. Some of them don't tell their missus, right? But if they can speak to another man who's gone through it, then it speaks volumes. And I think that is something that my dad could have used when he was alive.
Well, the thing is, 100%, what happens is this begins, I always think of it as the 3 S's, actually. It begins in secrecy, because we're keeping this a secret, it's just between you and I. Then the silence is ensured. Now, not everyone has a loving perpetrator. So, for instance, in my case, another survivors' cases, it can be just violent attacks throughout childhood, and family members as well. But the point is that the silence is ensured, or the secrecy enables it to be ensured, because threats are made if you tell. And then, but what renders us, in my humble opinion, absolutely silent and incapacitated, unable to ever speak, is the shame. The shame takes the gold. And the shame takes the gold because, as children, we don't have the ability or the cognition at that stage in our lives to understand, A, what the hell's happening, and B, why is it happening, and C, it's really wrong. And we know that children will carry that. So,
yeah, it's very true. Shame is a huge one.
Yeah, it's huge. But how fantastic! So you've got the Andy Project. What's the other charitable organization?
So we've got the Andy Project, and then we Rescue Kids. So there's me and 2 other co-founders. This charity specifically was launched about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. Couldn't be that long, maybe a year and a half ago. That's in America, that charity. So my 2 co-founders are American based, and I launched it with one of them specifically, and that's called We Rescue Kids. And what we do there is we provide mental health care with our licensed child therapists to children who've gone through sexual abuse and or sex trafficking. So that's what we're doing at the moment. And so basically, when people donate, those donations are specifically paying the therapists to then help these kids. So that's what's happening now. The future goal is to do that, but alongside doing that is have safe homes located all over the US, where we're housing kids who ultimately have been taken away from families because they need to be taken away from families, right? Because their parents are abusing them, and or rescued from sex trafficking rings, and then they get housed in our safe homes.
It's amazing. Well, you must be constantly kind of hearing about stories globally, actually, I imagine.
Yeah, every day I'm hearing stories, whether it's from adults that reach out to me, teenagers that reach out to me, or kids from the charity. So my co-founder Juliet, she runs most of the work because she's boots on the ground in the States. So she reports some of the stories to me that she's, dealing with. And then for me, I'm hearing stories through my brand, my content, and soon to be, because the Andy project just launched, and soon to be, it'll be through that as well.
Fantastic. So, Perry, for you yourself, how did you, just thinking for our survivors listening to this, how did you manage to come to terms with everything, and what sort of helped you through the healing and recovery process, I guess?
So the main thing that helped me through the healing and recovery process is the leading with curiosity and finding forgiveness. What I mentioned earlier. That's at the top, right? That's at the top, because without it, I wouldn't be able to be where I'm at now, doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So that 100% is the thing that I'd lead with. Now, but the main thing for me, which is what I'm all about, is what I preach every single day, is this whole notion around breaking the silence. Yeah. Right? The hashtag that I'm building, the movement, the book, Breaking the Silence, the movie, Breaking the Silence. Now, how I done it specifically is not the way that I recommend it to my audience and to people that I'm going to be speaking to now. So when I broke my silence, I told somebody, right? I told my girlfriend. Now, I don't recommend people do that when they're living in silence, right? I recommend, so for everybody listening, if you're living in silence, I recommend you to break your silence to yourself in as many ways as possible first, before you tell somebody else. There's a reason for this. There's a very specific reason. And by the way, this has been tried and tested with hundreds, probably even thousands of people who have purchased my book, who have messaged me, and who have told me this. That's when you, for example, random numbers here, you've been living in silence for 12 years and you want to break your silence and you're going to tell somebody, the chances are extremely likely that you're going to be very vulnerable to whatever the reaction is going to be, right? So if you're going to tell your sister Joanne about what happened, and your sister Joanne says that you're lying, that could absolutely send you into a rabbit hole, right, of darkness, and never share your story again. Because the first time you've done it, you've now attached this trauma to it of this negative reaction, attachment, right? So reaction. Now, if she doesn't believe you, if she laughs, if she rejects you, or just doesn't give you a reaction that is positive, right? Same thing that can happen, because you are relying on her reaction to fill these voids that are within you, right? These insecurities wrapped around your story. But if you, for example, break the silence to yourself, and you share your story to yourself in 18 different ways, now on the 19th time, you're going to tell your sister Joanne, you're in a position of power. You don't care what her reaction is, right? Because the only reaction that matters is yours, that you've given yourself the last 18 times you've shared it, and those who need to hear it most, i.e. everybody else living in silence, right? And it is that situation, is that switch of stepping into your power when you're sharing that story. That is truly what breaking your silence is, because it ensures enough safety and power that surrounds it, and that can ensure a much promising future once you're out in the open, living free. And very, very quickly, ways that you can break your silence. There's an infinite amount of ways, because it doesn't have to be verbal. Verbal is a method of communication, right? Art is a method of communication. right? Fitness, method of communication. Okay, so you can, for example, I use this one a lot. You see a blank canvas, you see an artist get paint, splatter paint all over it, right? And then some people are like, is that art? What on earth is that? Right? I could do that, right? But how do you not know? Yeah. But how do you not know that that artist lived in silence for 16 years? And the way that they just broke the silence to themselves was get pain and emotionally unleash that box, and that sort of array of colors that you see on that canvas is the array of their emotions, right? And that's the first method of them breaking their silence. The second one, maybe they wrote a poem. The third one, maybe they choreographed a dance piece that expresses their emotions that they've trapped. Now, if you can imagine, but here's the thing, nobody else needs to know, right? It's just you. Those inner demons that can start to quieten, right? And now, 23rd time, then you tell somebody, you tell your partner, you tell your family, right? You tell your kids, you tell your friends, and it's a completely different switch up.
That's really fascinating. And actually, what I'm loving about that, Perry, is you're appealing to all the senses, because we have 5 or 6 if you count our instinct, our intuitive sixth sense. But I love it because not everyone is capable of feeling confident verbally. Some people prefer to journal or write. Some people, as you indicate, might just feel comfortable in front of a canvas, or dancing or sport or something. But I love it. It's kind of, you can't get it wrong, can you?
You can't, and it will work 100% of the time, because the thing is, there's no time limit on this. We're not saying, right, break your silence to yourself over the next 2 weeks, and you're going to tell somebody in 3 weeks' time. You can spend the next 5 years on your own journey of breaking your silence to yourself intimately, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right? It's in your own time.
So for you, when you, obviously your silence was broken because your beautiful nan saw what happened and quickly pulled you aside or pulled you out of the room. So your silence was broken because it was witnessed, and then an adult intervened and said, took you out of there, took you home. What was your, once you'd kind of possibly got over the shock of that, what was your initial way of breaking your silence? I mean, you're describing a lot of different methodologies. I'm just wondering, for you personally, was there one that you kind of felt more confident with?
Well, I mean, this process that I just shared with you there, that is something that I have discovered, learned, and practiced with others after I broke my silence, right? I kind of did it in a way that made me learn, okay, I was very vulnerable in that situation. And if my girlfriend said anything that was bad, I don't know what could have happened.
Yeah.
But if we go back to when I was younger, I could in theory say, well, the first time I broke my silence was when I wrote that story. I love writing, right? The feature film, I've written a feature film. So I love, and the book, I love to write. So that's probably why I express that story through that method of communication to begin with. Now, mentally, all the way up until my later years, I don't remember it affecting me. I don't remember, being depressed about the abuse, because I still didn't really see it in that light. And also at the same time, I was kind of detaching myself from that, because I didn't want to remind myself that I was a boy that has been abused by another man.
Yes.
Right. It's only really when I entered the society of other men, right, and egos and stigmas and all this sort of stuff, and women, that it kind of started to get up to the surface, and the sexual abuse starts to become a thing on the news. And then it sort of really broke through, and then I was become more aware as an adult, seeing my dad, and then that's what really, really sort of surfaced it. But my method of communication for breaking my silence started off as a story, and then became verbally, I guess, on the second attempt, which again I wouldn't recommend for people. Make sure it's much further down the line.
Wow. And, gosh, our audience out there are going to be loving this because it's sort of a bit of a roadmap for them. So I really appreciate this. Where you're also, while we're talking about writing, watch me neatly segue into your book. What's happening with your book?
Yeah, so I launched my book February last year. Funny story, really, really quick story. So I first lockdown that happened. So when COVID first became a thing, we all went into that first lockdown. I was at home. I'd left my business at that point because the lockdown actually made me realize how disconnected and unfulfilled I was. I wasn't living my story. I wasn't helping people in the way that I wanted to help them. And I think that happened for a lot of people in some way.
Yeah.
So I left that business to my business partner, or ex-business partner, and I was just not knowing what I was doing. It's just me and my dog in my house, and didn't know what I was doing. Now, 2 or 3 episodes into the Jeffrey Epstein documentary on Netflix, when it was on there at the time, I was watching these women who were crying, saying that they were living in silence because of this powerful man. And it just made me realize now at that stage, my story had already gone viral. I'd already ranked up over 100,000 followers on TikTok, right? From sharing my story. And I was like, I needed a different way to get my message out. And I love writing. I was like, why don't you just give a crack at a book? And I was like, I have no idea how to write a book. I was like, who cares? Just do it, right? Just do it. Okay. If you don't know how to do something, it's pretty simple for you to find out how, right? You just got to ask somebody or do a little bit of research. So anyway, I ended up writing the book. It took me about a month to write the book. And then I was like, okay, I want to get it out, but I want a publisher. I was struggling to get a publisher. And I was like, okay, I don't have money to hire a book coach and a designer and an editor and all this sort of jazz. I don't have 5 to 10,000 to do all that. So, okay. And then sat on the book because this perfectionism, which is really just insecurities, didn't allow me to get the book out. So I sat on that book for nearly a year, right? A year later, I'm like, dude, just get the book out. What is your problem? Right. And then what I was because even at that stage, it's like, okay, well, I still don't have 5 to 10,000 to put into it. I was like, so what's going to happen then? Is there ever going to be a right time? When you do have 5 to 10,000, you might be like, that investment needs to go somewhere else, right? So I was like, Perry, just test yourself. So what I did, went onto Canva. I used an acting headshot of mine. I put that on the front cover, right? And then I did all of the text, put it through Grammarly, spell check, right? Then I marketed the book myself and I launched it, marketed, and it became bestseller in 2 categories: mental health and sexual abuse, on Amazon in the UK and in the US. And that led me to do a TEDx talk. It led to media. It led to the first charity. Now, the book itself is called Breaking the Silence: Stories from Survivors of Sexual Abuse. It's on Amazon. And that book, I wanted to make it as a guide. So that book is in 3 parts. Part 1 is my story, Breaking My Silence. Part 2, there's 14 stories in there of other survivors of abuse, some of them breaking the silence for the very first time inside that book. Half of them are named, half of them are unnamed. Now, there's a page at the end of part 2, 15th story, right? That is for the reader to get a pen and write their story inside the book so they become the 15th survivor. The third part of the book are steps that one can take to break their silence, shift an identity, talking about masculinity, talking about forgiveness,
Yeah.
and then ways that they can break their silence, which I've talked about already. So that is the book. It's a guide to actually help people practically with stepping into the light.
Fantastic. And wow, what a journey. So no rest for you in any way, shape, or form.
No, I rest for me. Like, I'm going to Greece next Friday with my girlfriend and her family. We're going for a week. Now, when I fly back, we fly back Saturday night. The following morning on the Sunday, I'm then going on a 2-week cruise around Greece and Croatia with my family, because we do that every year. And so I'll be away for 3 weeks, and I'm thinking, there's no way The people are like, oh yeah, 3-week holiday, no work. That sounds vile to me, right? I cannot take a break for that long, because for me, my work is everything, you know? My work, because I don't just run a business or run a charity or run everything for nothing. Like I do what I do because I wake up and go to sleep thinking about those living in silence and how I can help them break that, right? And spending 3 weeks away from that just isn't working. So the reason I'm saying that is, yeah, there's no rest. There's a lot of work to do with the Andy project. There's a lot of work to do with the movie. I want to write my second book, which I spoke about it earlier, about owning your story. And there's a lot that I want to talk about on the subject of own your story, own your life.
Yeah.
Because there is very small chapter in Breaking the Silence called Own Your Story. And that, for a lot of people, has been the most powerful, because I didn't realize that was an option, right?
Yeah.
And I want to dedicate a whole book to that, because I truly believe how transformative it can be.
Well, absolutely. And, I think you are already, but I think this movie as well is going to impact a lot of people who haven't been able to own their own story or step into the light in any way, shape, or form through no fault of their own, Perry. Like some of us are more resilient than others. They say that the average age for survivors to speak is 52.
Wow.
Digest that.
Wow.
So there's a
Yeah.
lot of people out there who haven't been able to speak. And for survivors, part of it can be that they may have tried and been shut down, or they may have been threatened, or they may just have felt it was all their fault. Pick apart any part. There's going to be a lot of reasons why. And I guess partly having people like you on the show gives people another way through and another small way of perhaps owning that. So I thank you deeply. Is there anything you would say to our survivors out there, and perhaps even our younger ones? I'm even thinking of our late teens and sort of late teens to late 20s, that kind of age group where perhaps it's been really hard for them, and what's something they could try? I mean, I know you've given us quite a lot to think about. Is there anything extra you would add?
It's an interesting one, because here's the thing, right? We cannot control somebody's reaction. We can't control what's outside of our control. We just never can, right? No matter how much we want to try, we can try to influence, but we can't ultimately control what's outside of our control. So for those in the later years, I say this a lot, and I guess this can be applicable to the younger years, is that your story is your story. If you want to speak out, right, your story's got nothing to do with your family. Your family may have been involved, and they will have their own version of the story. And their story is not your story, but your story is your story. And that's the most precious thing that you can ever have. And people will try to take your truth away from you. They will try to take your innocence away from you. They will try to take your story away from you. Never ever let somebody take your story away from you. If you're in your younger years, and if, for example, it's your parents that abused you, or your sibling, or your uncle, or your auntie, or your grandma, or your granddad that abused you, right? I can say, oh, it wasn't your fault. Here's the thing. Deep down it wasn't your fault, right? You know deep down it wasn't, right? But it's the fact that your story, okay, is something that you need to carry with you, right? Not be insecure about it, and lead with your story moving forward. If anybody in your family doesn't believe you, or they say to you, don't share your story because people won't care. Don't share your story because we're involved. Like when I first shared my story, I had family members that didn't want me to say anything, right? Because they were like, first of all, Perry, why would you share that? Which is just words that are covering up the fact that they're insecure about it themselves, right? There's a part of it where if I'm sharing my truth, in part, I'm sharing my stepmom's truth, right? Okay, because that's her husband that I'm talking about, right? But at the same time, there is an element, okay? There is an element, and I won't lie, wrapped up in this of I don't give a fuck. Sorry for the French, right? But there is an element of that. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
If you have something negative to say about my story, say it, but I don't give a fuck, right? And there is a lot of power in that sentence that I'm saying there, because using the right way, right, you're protecting yourself from those people around you that, yes, love you, right, but they are projecting their own insecurities onto you. So your story is your story.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's that, Gloria?
I said they're putting themselves first. They're not
They are
first. They're putting themselves. It's self-protection, isn't it? But you know.
Yeah. So yeah. So wrapped up in all of this is to put yourself first with your story.
Yeah.
Right. Rather than but I don't know if my parents wouldn't be happy, or my kids, you know, like I've got a client who to begin with was really insecure about sharing a story because of her daughter. Right. And was going forward with it. And all of a sudden she wasn't taking any of my advice. And I was really curious, like, come on, Jane, what's going on? I found out that, well, basically Jane shared her story, but then she didn't share anything for like a couple of weeks after that. And I was like, what's happened? She goes, oh, well, basically my daughter came to me and she said to me, Mom, why on earth did you just share your story like that? You know, nobody cares online about your story. She goes, even my friends said to me, why is your mom sharing that? Right. And then she goes, and basically what my daughter said really seeded into my mind and stopped me. Right. And I said to her, I was like, listen, people's opinions can literally change overnight. They can change overnight. So if somebody's opinion today can change tomorrow, why would you let their opinion today stop you from doing something for the rest of your life? If it can change tomorrow. Like my stepmom had things to say to begin with. Now she's a massive supporter. Her opinion changed, right? You have to lead the way. You have to go a different path in order for people to accept and follow. So take on board that to some degree, and I hope it helps.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Perry. I think, you know, the light you're shining is going to give people something to look to when they're struggling themselves. And yeah, I really love it. But thank you so much. So please stay on the line as I close out with the audience. So audience, wow, you've got several things to think about. And I think the two big takeaways for me sharing with you as fellow survivors is this: own your own story. It's yours. Make it what you can, accept what it is, and move forward in your way. And I guess the second thing is that there's more than one way of doing this, guys. And as Perry alluded to, you know, there might be 18, 19 different ways you tell yourself your own story first. And then you can share, and then you may have the confidence and support. So look, as with all of these, aren't we lucky to have had him here? Please go well, look after your beautiful selves. We believe you, we stand with you, we support you. And until next time, see you soon.
Thanks, Gloria.